The Civil War, infamously known as the bloodiest war in American history. The conflict split up the nation into two parts, the Confederacy and the Union. The conflict brought the nation to a turmoil as many young men were drafted to fight. Americans remember these men as heroes due to their bravery and their courage shown on the battlefield. But one thing that Americans seem to forget is the amount of bravery that went on behind the battlefield. Men and women from the South and North alike risked their lives when they acted as spies and infiltrated behind enemy lines to try and help their side win the war. The spies were an integral part of the Civil War, changing the outcomes of vital battles and getting extremely confidential information to their respective military leaders.
Many people forget about spies and how critical they were to the outcome of the war. Women spies stood out because Americans had never seen women play such an important role in a war before. During the Civil War, there are said to be hundreds of women spies for both the Confederates and the Unions. Due to their dedicated and non-threatening portrayal by American society, many generals and soldiers did not suspect anything of them. Women went undetected in the beginning of the war, but as soldiers caught on, spying became more and more dangerous and difficult as the punishment was terrible. Some of the punishments for women spies was getting deported to Canada or the South, sometimes imprisonment and sometimes, in rare cases, execution. From a primary source, I quote from Miss Rose Greenhow, a very important spy for the Confederates. And thus, for a period of 7 days, I was my little child, was placed absolutely at the mercy of men without character or responsibility. That during the first evening, a portion of these men became brutally drunk and boasted in my hearing of the nice times they expected to have with the female prisoners, and that rude violence was used towards a colored servant girl during that evening, the extent of which I have not been able to learn. That's from PBS.org, a primary source. This is an example of what happened to female spies if they got caught, and why it was so dangerous and risky to be a spy during the Civil War. Women spies during this time were typically single, young, smart, pretty, and white. Being single was a characteristic, and not having a family, as women with a family would have to care for their loved ones, especially during a war. They wouldn't have to go across the nation and find out information. They would have to stay with their families. Women spies had to be careful of any unladylike behavior, as the Civil War was during a Victorian era, a harsh time of rules for women.
Women spies used a variety of different techniques to acquire their information. One of the techniques they would use was that they would hide secret notes and messages in their dolls, in the bottom of their skirts, or in the baskets they carried. Another way they used, which was very important for them and not for the men, because the men couldn't really use it due to the fact that there weren't many women soldiers in the war, was that they would seduce the information out of soldiers and generals. It may sound a bit dirty, but it was very effective, and it let the women acquire a lot of important information. There are multiple other ways that we will be showing you in a bit.
Here's an example of one of the techniques that women used to hide notes in their hair. If you look around my shoulder, women talked to generals and soldiers and then got the information and hid it in their hair like this.
Another technique that women spies used was that when they went to transfer food to many of the soldiers and generals, they'd hollow out the fruit like this, and they'd stick a note. Now, normally it'd be covered, but we couldn't fit the cover. So the generals would not realize, and here, as you can see, we did not really, it's not very effective here, but back then, when they would put it, generals wouldn't really check. And so once the soldiers or whoever they were delivering the food to opened the apple, they'd find that there was a note inside. And these usually held codes or secret information that would help them decipher what the enemies were going to do next. In terms of how women spies affect our nation today, they revolutionized espionage warfare because they stepped into the role of spies and did things that people didn't expect at all. They got a lot of major information, and they helped the respective sides, whether they were fighting for the Union or the Confederacy. From that point on, America used spies in all their war efforts, such as World War II, where they sent many spies, women and men, to Europe. Along with revolutionizing espionage warfare, they also helped society understand that women were more than housewives, and that they could step into difficult roles in society and help the nation in times of difficulty. Stay tuned to find out about the most impactful individual women spies and how they changed the course of the Civil War, making it much longer than it actually could have been.